Hey, what's up? It's Jake, and we're going to be updating our project to make it more production grade. And so I created a repo called production grade Terraform, and then I added my modules and my previous project to my workspace so I can start hacking away at this. But essentially, what we're going to do, and I'll put this in my README, is the following. So, um, there's a little like after we went through the task list, you saw there was a lot of things that you need to take into consideration when you're going to do a migration or do a project from scratch like greenfield or whatever. And so one of the things that we're going to want to do is start out by breaking down um, some of our stuff into small modules. So let's just make a little category here for production grade infrastructure modules. All right, and that's going to be broken down into 5 things. We're going to do small modules. We want to do composable modules. We're going to do testable modules. We're going to do releasable modules. And lastly, a couple things beyond Terraform modules. So to get started, this video is only going to cover small modules. So up to this point, we've been working out of this giant web server cluster module, and in here we've got a security group, our ingress and egress rules, we got a load balancer, target group, a listener, a launch template, an auto scaling group, an attachment, and an auto scaling schedule. That's a lot of stuff, right? So a lot of times whenever you get somebody who's new to Terraform, they'll build everything in one file and it gets really, really big. They even put dev, prod, everything in one file, which obviously is a bad idea. And we talked about isolating state files. But with large modules, they can contain, once you get over a couple hundred lines, you can kind of see that some of the closely related pieces of infrastructure in this main file that we got here, this could be kind of harmful because you could destroy something and think you're destroying one thing and forget, oh, my launch template's in here, right? And so um, there's many downsides to using large modules. First of all, they're slow. It takes a long time to do the plans. It takes a long time to do the provisioning. And so if you need to make quick changes, and let's say you're working on a load balancer and somebody else is working on an app and somebody else is working on the scaling and the template, you can't all work at the same time if you're working on a single module. So that also kind of slows you down. They're also insecure because in order for me to do this, I have to have access to security groups and to load balancers and to launch templates and to whatever else is in here. So if you make a huge module and you're doing network stuff, and you're doing load balancer stuff, and you're doing IAM stuff, you're going to need a user that needs access to all of those things just to run that one module. So that's not very secure. That's also kind of risky because if you kind of have all your eggs in one basket here, and if you make a mistake in one place, you could break a lot of things. So even a minor change to staging with a typo could delete prod, which is super dangerous, right? Also, the larger they get, the harder they are to understand because there's a lot to take in. And if you have a nice, small, concise modules and everything's just kind of relevant to that domain, then it really does make it easier to understand. Which also gets into review. So if you're doing code review, it's a lot faster to go through review with smaller modules, which also makes them easier to test. So large modules are hard to test, they're hard to review, they're hard to understand, they're risky, they're not secure, and they're slow. So for that reason, we're going to kind of break this up a little bit. And our web server cluster module, we're actually going to start creating a few more because it's getting kind of big, right? So what we want to do is we want to create an auto scaling group module, and we're going to create a load balancer module, and then we'll go ahead and put our app in a separate module. So this section on small modules is going to be based around refactoring all this code to get that to work. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we don't have anything running. Now I already destroyed everything, so we don't have to worry, but I know the network, for example, is in fact up. The web server cluster is destroyed though. So that's fine. We can leave the network up for now. But so what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up creating in our modules repo, we're going to end up creating a couple different folders. So the first one we'll want to do is we've got web server cluster right here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make a new folder and call this services. Okay. And then we're going to make another one called cluster. And in our cluster is going to be our auto scaling group. Okay, so I'm just going to make a file ASG. I'm going to rename all this. I'm just putting it here as a placeholder so I know what to do. And for services, we're going to be making our actual web server, and that's where we're going to stick that. So our web server should be here. Our auto scaling group should be here. And that should include our launch configuration. Let's see here. We're gonna do. Let me make sure I got this down. Modules cluster. Yeah, that's what we're gonna do. So in here, I'm gonna make a new folder from cluster and call this ASG rolling deploy. Okay, so I'm just gonna delete this because I've got the folder now. All right, so we're gonna move the resources from this main file in web server cluster, this here, to here. So that's the idea. And that should be our launch configuration, our auto scaling group, our schedule security group, and if we have any Cloudwatch metrics, which we don't, we can put those in there as well. So that's where we're going to move that. And then the next thing we're going to do is in module services, we're actually going to create another folder called web server cluster. And in here, we're going to move the variables file. Actually, no, I don't want this. Sorry. We're going to move this variables file to modules cluster ASG rolling deploy. And then so our main and our variables will also be over here. And that should be our cluster name, AMI, instance size, or type, min-max, default, auto scaling, tags, server ports, all that stuff. So yeah, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get that whole thing set up. The next thing we'll do is the load balancer. And then once that's set up, then we should have a load balancer, and then we've got our auto scaling group. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So I'm going to break this one module up into two different modules just so that we have kind of our auto scaling group security and launch configuration in one, and then our actual cluster information in the other. So the app is kind of separate from the infrastructure that's supporting that app, hosting that app. Yeah, and after that we'll make a one for the load balancer. So how do I do this? Well, let me delete this real quick here. All right, so in our cluster folder, we got modules, cluster, ASG rolling deploy, right? So we're going to want to take, in here, we're going to need a main file for this. Yeah, let's make a main file, main.tf. And then in this main file, we want our launch configuration. So let's go ahead, and this is going to be fun. And I'm using launch templates, by the way, because I'm about to break a whole bunch of stuff. My thing's not going to work anymore. And we're going to want to take the, what else do we got here? The auto scaling group. So where's our ASG auto scaling group, which has a launch template and a lifecycle and tags. So all this, I'm going to cut this out and we're going to stick this in here. And then we want our schedules. So here are our schedules. That's set. And then our security group and our security group rules. So here's our security group and here's our rules. Let's cut that out of here and stick that in there. And then I don't have any Cloudwatch metrics to add if you're following along in the book. And remember, this is a module, so you're not going to be putting providers in here because it's a module. Okay, so if you're wondering where that is, that's why it's not there. All right, so I have that separated out into a main.tf file. So the next thing we want to do is we want to take this variables file and move this over here. And the variables we want, so I'm going to make a new variable file, variables.tf. And this is our original one. So we're going to want our cluster name. Where is the cluster name? Security group. Oh, and MySQL is updating. Oops. Let's take a look at, let me close that. Get lens, launch template, key pair, instance name tag, target group, ALB. I must have not called it a cluster name. I called it something else. Well, I know we're going to need our AMI, and my AMI is actually in data. So that's a thing. So what I'll probably do is just copy all this and then create another file called data.tf and paste it in there. So now I have my AMI. And then what else do I need? I need my instance type. So let's take a look at variables, template instance type. So we're going to cut this out, paste it into here. And then we need our min max size, which I don't think I put in here because, oh yeah, I didn't set a default value. We'll do our desired too. Min, max, and desired. We'll cut that out and stick that in there. Enable auto scaling. We're going to want to stick this in here, as well as our custom tags and our server port. So let's grab custom tags. That can go in there. And is that it? Yeah, that's it. The security groups for the load balancer we'll use in a separate variables file for when we do the load balancer, but the security group for the instances will be in there. So I'll have to add that too. So all these variables, and I added a bunch. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at this main file and go, okay, I need my data. I need launch template name. So let's go grab launch template name and just make sure anything that I've declared is there. And in fact, I'm going to do them in order that I see them, so I don't miss anything. All right, so we have that first, and then the data, which I got, and then template instance type and key pair. So template instance type is here. So now we just need key pair. It's like doing surgery. All right, and then now that we have key pair, we need, let's see, path module. We're going to need this script, right? So let's grab this script, copy, new file, httpd.ssh, paste, or is it sh? Sorry, sh. There we go. That looks right. All right, I'll close that. Data for the network, we have that, which is probably also going to change because I'm going to make a networking module as well. Var instance name tag. So let's come over here. We need the instance name tag. That goes after the key pair. So here's my key pair. Okay, got instance name tag. And then the autoscaling group name in our data file we already have. So let's grab this autoscaling group name. You see like why I like to do them in order. It's easier to find them. All right, and then ASG desired max min is the order I have them in. So desired, and then let's do max, and then min. Okay, and then custom tags would be after that, after min. All right, and then enable auto scaling schedule here and here, and that enable auto scaling schedule is there. And then I've got this security group name, and SG name tag. So we're going to grab security group name like this, and then SG name tag like this. And then I've got this reference to local, so we're going to need to make sure that we grab that, which I believe was in my main file for locals. Save. All right, let's come back up here to add my locals. All right, and that should do it. So got my locals, I got my resource, got another resource, another resource, another resource, resource. So, I mean, we broke it up and that's all there. And keep in mind too that the load balancer takes a long time. So now I can do rolling deploys of the instances in the auto scaling group, and I don't have to wait for it to mess with the load balancer or accidentally delete the load balancer or something like that. Okay, so I'm not using any remote state. I haven't initialized anything. This is totally new. So that seems to be good. In the book, it had us create Cloudwatch Metrics. So I'll probably go double check. I'm going to go back a couple chapters and read that. I'll pause the video and I'll come back and I'll tell you what I find. All right. So I added a cluster name variable before I get to my alerts here, just to simplify this a bit. So what we see here is at the beginning, I replaced the name of my launch template with just cluster name dash launch dash template. So I made that the first variable, and then the launch template name goes away. So I don't need this launch template name anymore, which means also if I'm updating my old environment just to keep up with it, I don't need this. And then I come down, I use my data, I use my template instance type and key pair, so template instance type and key pair can stay. and then data, and then for the tag, I just actually used cluster name dash instance. So then my instance name tag can go away. This will make this easier if there's a developer being asked to input things, then they don't have to think as much about what to name things. It'll just all be the same. All right, so then we get down to my auto-scaling group, and I just changed it to cluster name dash ASG, so we can get rid of the name of the ASG. Come over here, get rid of the ASG. Maybe I didn't have, oh, there it is. I was like, I know I had it in here somewhere. Okay, there's that. Just cleaning it up, right? Data, okay, average, okay, we got that. That's all still the same. Custom tags, still the same. Enable auto schedule, all still the same. I changed my security group to just cluster name dash SG with the tags being var.cluster name, so it has the name of the tag. So then I don't need I need custom tags. I need that. I do not need security group name, so I got rid of that. Security group name tag. I really could just change that because they're going to be like, well, I don't know what to name it, right? So let's just get rid of that. And then for the tag, security group SG, and then tag. And then I come here and I can get rid of security group name tag. And I can get rid of security group name. So really simplifying this a lot. And local ports. All right, so here's the metrics I added. So I added a Cloudwatch metric for high CPU utilization. The alarm name is just cluster name dash high dash CPU dash utilization. Uses the EC2 namespace and the CPU utilization metric. And it's going to be looking for my auto-scaling group and using a comparison operator of greater than threshold evaluation period 1, period 3. Statistic is the average CPU. The threshold is 90 unit percent. And then I did basically the same thing, but for low credit balance. So if it should be scaling in, or if we're running low on credits, I should say. So basically the same thing, except I used a less than threshold, a couple different values here, count unit, 10 credits. So I added a couple Cloudwatch metric alarms and then changed the variables. So I only have this many variables now, and my module is a lot smaller, which is great. So we should have an instance type, a key pair, and then we haven't messed with the load balancer or the target group because those are both going to be in the next area. Let me go back over here. Desired min max. Okay, so this all looks good. I'm going to move this cluster name up to the top because I'm anal. I was just kidding. I want to only copy this line. Save. Here's our custom tags. Okay, so that's a lot cleaner. So now we've got cleaned up tags, we've got our metrics, and we've got everything moved over to this one main file. And it really only has, it's got the data file on it, which I could use the AMI exactly, but I didn't because I want it to be like able to use any network. Getting the data from my network remote state from that S3 bucket. We've got our main file, which we already looked at, and our variables, which we already looked at. So this looks pretty good. So the next thing is to do the load balancer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this information from the main file that I had in webserver-cluster variables. Oh, I need to make a new one. So in this module now, I'm going to make a new module folder called networking. And in this folder, we're going to have another folder called ALB, right? Because I could have other folder for like the VPC. And then, yeah, let's make a main file here. Okay. And over here, what we want is, if we go back to our old main file, this is all I have left, right? So what we want is the load balancer. So we're going to cut this out, go to our new ALB guy. Here's our load balancer. And then we also want our, I should probably add this auto scaling group attachment, shouldn't I? Let me cut this out real quick and put it in my cluster ASG rolling deploy. So here's my auto scaling group. Let's go ahead and attach this because that would be useful. All right, and then for my network, all right, so we had the load balancer. Let's go grab our listener. So main, let's grab this listener. And then under networking, main, here's my listener. And then we need a security group for the ALB, not for the instances, and the rule. So I don't have separate security groups for that, but it's basically the same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this security group and these rules, and I'm going to copy them. I'm going to go over to main, save, and then we basically want to pass the same security group rules. So we've got the same variable that's being used. So we're going to have to put in a vars file, right? So we'll have to do that too. So in this case, like for this load balancer, I'd probably put like ALB SG, ALB SG. That just looks horrible when you do that sometimes. Okay, and then this is basically the same thing, VPC, and then the tag, I'm just going to go ahead and put AL. No, I'll leave the tag the same. It's kind of nice to have the tags where I can look up the cluster name and see the costs and stuff. All right, so that's my security group. And then my security group rule is going to be the same. Egress rule is going to be the same. So that looks good. So now we've got a security group. And I'm going to have to double check on this one because the way that security groups work with, because I might not need these. We'll see. I have to double check and see how this is set up. But this doesn't in any way attach itself to the load balancer. So the way that it's set up right now, it just creates a security group. So yeah, I haven't needed it in the previous build. So I'm going to double check this documentation, and then I'll let you know. But what we will need is a variables file. So let me make that real quick. Variables.tf. And then we're just going to take our ALB name and our, well, we're going to need a target group too in our other guy. I don't know where it didn't mention that. Let's stick that somewhere. So we definitely need the ALB name. So let's take a look at this. So we've got our ALB, which uses ALB name, and then some data. So we're going to need the data file. So we're going to need to copy that. Copy, networking, ALB, new file, data.tf, paste, but I don't need any of the AMI information. So we can just straight up get rid of all this because it just needs the network. So that's all it's using. There's local ports here. So 1, 2, 3. And this isn't really that useful now because I broke it up. So in the main for ASG rolling, you'll see I have a local here. And if I do a search for HTTP port or find, I've got it in the security group rules, and that's it. So it's not really worth making a variable, because I actually create more lines of code using a locals than if I just do this. So don't get crazy with your variables. I even warned of that when I was doing this. Okay, so now I don't see that anywhere. So now I'll come back here, and it's even less useful here. 80, 80. Where else did I see it? Oh, and then the load balance, the listener for 80. These aren't going to change, so I don't see the need to use a variable. And I don't like using locals if I don't have to. Okay, so that's updated. That's a little cleaner, right? Less lines of code. Again, making things simple. And ALB, security group ALB. Yeah, so I think that's it. So I'm going to check the security group on the ALB, but the only other thing I have in here, you'll notice I have this like variables chilling out here for the target group. So let's take a look at our main file for ASG rolling. So I have a launch template, an auto-scaling group, an auto-scaling group attachment, which attaches it to what? Attaches it to a load balancer. So I don't have the ability to use this anymore because it's going to be in a separate module, right? So what I'm going to need is I'm going to need to make data. I'm going to need to output this load balancer information. So like before here, I was doing like this kind of output. I'm going to need to create, just like I did with my network, I'm going to need to make a remote state DynamoDB table for each of these, and then use it as a data source just like this, so I can, from this ASG rolling deploy module, get the load balancer ARN, because they're in separate places now. Makes sense? So we're going to need that. And then you have an auto scaling schedule, security group, security group, security group, Cloudwatch, Cloudwatch, Cloudwatch. So I'm curious where my target group is supposed to live. I mean, I know where it's supposed to live, but I just think it's interesting that the target group was not mentioned at all anywhere. Yeah, that's wrong. So the way it should be is once you have a load balancer, then you'd create a target group for the load balancer. So like look here, if I put this in here. So you have a target group, you can change this port to port 80, and it's looking for the network and the target group name. So it needs var for target group name and the VPC ID for that. So we just have a target group, right? And then you need a target, you need to like assign it, right? Like if you ever looked at adding the resources. So we'll do that next. So let me pause this and check the security group, and then I'll be right back. All right, so here is what I did. So I have the load balancer, which is dependent on nothing except for the network. And then I have the target group that I'm going to create, which just needs the network. And the listener is what is forwarding to here. So it should be created in that order. So that's the way that I'll list it. So as far as variables go, the ALB name should be first, followed by the target group name, followed by the cluster name. So now we have a problem. So I have the ALB name here. We can finally get rid of this name here and put it into here. So can you guess what the problem is? How do I get the cluster name defined in this variable if the cluster name is defined in two different places? Interesting, right? And the reason would be because you should have such separate resources that you don't need to do that, right? And so the problem is because of the security group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the security group from the load balancer completely, because the last time I deployed this, I built the security groups, and the security group was really just being used at the instance level because I didn't feel it was necessary to have a security group on the load balancer and the instance with the same rules. Now, ideally, you would create a security group just for the listener, just because maybe this isn't the only thing that this security group or that this load balancer is going to load balance, but in this case it is, so I'm leaving that out and I don't need it. So all I have is the load balancer, a target group, and then a listener that does a forward to the target group. I only need two variables, and so there they are. I only need one data source, so there it is. So now this is covered, covered, and that looks good. In the main file for our rolling deploy, cluster name, AMI, covered, got it, got it, got it. So I don't see the need for any extra data sources now because everything has been included in here as is, and they're independent of each other. So that's the idea, is that you can make the modules independent of each other. So there's no reason that this can't run by itself. So now I have a rolling ASG rolling deploy module, and I've got an ALB module, my networking module. And then that's pretty much it. So that is all for now. We've taken this main file and turned it into nothing. We've taken this variables file and turned it into nothing. And what else do we have left? So there's nothing in there. We have outputs, so we might want to get the output of our ALB, right, when this guy runs. So let's go to networking, and I could put it in an outputs file, but it's so small, I'm just going to stick it at the end of my main file. And that's fine. You can do one or the other. That's totally fine. So in this case, I just needed to make sure that there's no reference to my load balancer here. So I'm just going to find for LB and see I do have it. Okay, so auto scaling attachment. So when the auto scaling attachment is created, the auto scaling group needs to be attached to the load balancer. So in this case, what I am going to have to do is this this auto scaling group is going to have to find the ID of the load balancer. So I'm going to have to create an extra data source in ASG rolling deploy that finds the Terraform remote state of, in this case, I have a network table, but I'm going to have to redo all of this, these state files. So we're going to have to pull that in. So we shall see. But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that, and then I'll get it rolling. And then in my next video, we'll start doing some composable modules. But I'm going to just get these two small modules working, and then I'll demo that really quick at the beginning of the next one before I go forward. So have fun. This is kind of a pain in the butt, and you have to go back and test everything and make sure it works and stuff. But trust me, once it's set up, it's going to be really nice. It'll be really nice, and it'll be very easy to work on. So have fun, good luck, and may the odds be ever in your favor.